you and hearing your voices and seeing your sweet faces. A couple of things to help you work with me tonight. You are going to need a couple of pieces of paper and something to write with, and to follow me and to sharing some things with me tonight. And you'll see I resorted to my graphics expert tonight. Uh, I enlisted Jody to do some graphics work with me, so you could read my writing this time. And I'm ask for some creative things from you tonight as well. And as you're collecting your pieces of paper, we're going to be studying beginning to number chapter 25. We're going to do chapter 25, chapter 26, 27, and the first part of chapter 36. Chapter 27 and 36 are companions together, so we'll put those together. So that's what we're going to be studying tonight. I would also begin where Jordan left off last week. Jordan had an excellent lesson last week on Balak and Balaam. And Jordan and I are working together on these lessons, and we're bouncing ideas off of one another for our graphics as well. And so, what we're trying to do is complement each other in the graphics that we're using and also the lessons that we're doing. We're trying to pair these things together so that they flow for you, and so we can have something to try to illustrate with you different things that we're trying to talk about. So, I appreciate very much his lesson last week, and I appreciate the way that he illustrated that with us as well. Did a very, very good job of driving home the one point: God's will be done. And I would tell you that is the one point we're going to see executed or delivered or brought out tonight. God's will is going to be done. Okay, hope you're ready. The first thing I want you to do is on your piece of paper, on one side, I want you to write the number 25. The number 25. Sorry about that. Like that. I'll come back to that in just a moment. So write on one side of your paper the number 25. So Numbers chapter 25, we just are following the events of Balaam and Balak. Remember, Balaam went to curse the Midianites and Moabites and instead wound up blessing them. And Balak said, "What's the business here, buddy? I'm paying you big bucks here to come and do what I ask you to do. Instead, you wound up blessing these people instead of cursing these people." Well, Balaam wasn't done, and neither was Balak. So we come to chapter 25, and we have two families that are mentioned here: the Moabites and the Midianites. I did some looking at that fascinated me. Maybe you knew this. If I knew it, I had forgotten it and refreshed my memory. I thought, what's the difference between the Moabites and the Midianites? Perhaps you knew this, but the Midianites were descendants of Abraham. You'll remember when Sarah died that Abraham married again, and the woman he married, her name was Keturah. You see that in Genesis chapter 25. And one of their sons was named Midian. Then you have Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. And remember, Ammon and Moab were descendants of Lot following the events of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So, what you have here with the Midianites and the Moabites is you have tribes who are cousins of one another. They're cousins together. Now, what happens here in Numbers chapter 25 and going forward is basically the Moabites kind of are integrated into the tribe of the Midianites. And so basically at this point, they're going to become the same thing. Though they are cousins together, the tribes are cousins, they're going to become the same tribe and going to be known as the Midianites. And so when the Midianites are destroyed, then the Moabites are also going to be destroyed as well. And that was something that fascinated me that I'd not really understood before. Or if I had, like I said, I have forgotten about it. Now, when we come to this story tonight, we come to the story. What I want you to do on top of that 25 is I want you to write the word the sin. the sin. Because the first part of this chapter has to do with the sin of the Moabites and the Midianites. Again, Balaam and Balak wanted Balaam to curse the people of God. Well, failing that, then what Balaam and Balak did was they led the people to commit sin. Well, that didn't go over very well. It didn't go over well with God. And so what God told them to do is he said, what I want you to do is I want you to get the leaders. And so I want you to draw from Numbers 25 an arrow up that says the leaders. The leaders. And what the leaders were going to do is the leaders were going to take those who had committed the sin and they're going to destroy them. There's going to be a judgment against them. In fact, as a result of that, you're going to have about 24,000 people that are going to die from a plague. But one of the men that sinned also was evidently one of the leaders from the tribe of Midian, and there was a woman, or Moab, and there was a woman from the tribe of Midian, and evidently her father was one of the leaders, and they sinned, and as a result of their sin, Phinehas, who was the grandson of Aaron, killed them. He ran them through with a sword. And as a result of that, it spared the wrath of God on the others. In fact, you'll see that in Numbers chapter 25. If you go over to what he says in verse 11, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Well, as a result of that, then God makes a covenant with Phinehas. So on the bottom of number 25, I want you to write, God makes a covenant with Phinehas, or you can just write Phinehas or grandson of Aaron. Well, as a result of that, you see the rebellion. And so in the next corner of the 25, I want you to write the rebellion. So hopefully what you see here is you see, oh, sorry, don't have it up there for you. Results of the rebellion. So hopefully you have all four of those that are written there. Now what I want you to do, as I tried to think of this myself, is when you see the sin, I want you to think of something that you can draw that in your mind represents the sin. Something that your mind that represents sin. Sin is so ugly. Sin is just something that's hard to try to put a picture to draw. But I thought about a skull with X across it. And then the leaders. I want you to draw a picture of leaders. And then when you think about the covenant that God had with Phinehas, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, what that covenant was. I want you to draw something that maybe makes you think of a covenant. A covenant is an agreement. And so God's making an agreement with Phinehas. And then you think about the results of the rebellion, the 24,000 that died because of the plague that was there. I want you to think of something that would represent that rebellion and something that would remind you about what that was. Now, as you think about that, on the left-hand corner of your paper, I want you to draw a cloud. I want you to draw a cloud. You see my cloud? This is a think cloud. This is a thought cloud. So here's something you're thinking about, and just outside your head here, poof, comes that little circle, comes that cloud. You remember? And so here's your thoughts that come out of this. So I was thinking about something that came out of this that would be something that would be good for us to know and remember. And the first thing I thought of is that sin is costly. You see, I put a dollar sign there to remind me that sin is costly. The second thing I would put there is that God is jealous. And I put a little heart there because it represents jealousy, the heart. Then I talked about the passing generation. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And I asked the question of how will we be remembered? So I put a question mark there. For the passing generation, I had Jody draw me a little figure there, a little man, a little person. So we think about this. You think about how costly sin is. It cost 24,000 people their lives. Sin could not be tolerated. God has never permitted sin among his people. Phinehas defended God's honor. And defending God's honor, he prevented disaster from more than the 24,000. And God made an agreement with Phinehas that said, you turned away my wrath. I'm going to make a covenant agreement with you that your family shall be in the priesthood line of priests forever. Of course, God had promised that to Aaron, but now he's making that same promise to Phinehas. So your family is going to be a family of priests. And he's pleased with what Phinehas has done. And then God is jealous. God wants our complete devotion. He wants our faithfulness. He wants us to worship him. Do you remember one of the first commandments that we had? One of the first of the 10 commandments? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, what has happened here in Numbers chapter 25? They have turned to worship the god of the Moabites and the Midianites. His name was Baal Peor. This is the first time that Baal Peor's name is mentioned in the Old Testament. I went online to Google to try to find a picture of Baal Peor. And the best I could figure out was this picture of someone sitting on a throne, and they kind of had a devil's horns coming out. And people were handing them their babies because of being Molech, the one who they sacrificed their babies to. And so Baal was this image, this idol that they worshiped. And it was very demon looking, very ugly and demon looking. Now that's interesting. Why would you turn to something that looked so ugly whenever God's picture is one of love? God has provided for them. In fact, this is the end of the 40 years of wandering. And that generation is going to pass away. That first generation that was lacking in faith, that did not obey God, they're now going to be brought to an end. Their generation is going to end. And this is the way it ends. It ends with them worshiping an idol. And so here's the passing of that generation. And so that's why I asked the question, how do we want to be remembered? This generation, this first generation, is going to be remembered as a generation that were a generation of unbelief, that did not put their faith in God and did not trust God to provide for them in view of all that God had provided for them and all that God had promised them. We'll see that in just a moment too. So sin was costly. Sin was costly, and it cost this generation their life. And so as we come to the end of Numbers, the passing generation is now going to go the way of all generations. God had delivered them from Egypt. He had provided for them from the wilderness. How will they be remembered? A faithless generation. Well, the question is, how are we going to be remembered? You may not realize this or understand this, but my father's generation was called the greatest generation. That's because when they came home from World War II, after the defeat of Hitler, after the defeat of Japan, they came back and they rebuilt America. And that generation was known for their ingenuity, for their strength, for their leadership. And that same group, called the greatest generation, helped build our churches that me and you get to be part of today. But we talked about 2 weeks ago, that generation is passing away. And what that means is my generation and your generation are the ones that are going to set the path. How will we be remembered? Will we be remembered as faithless and disobedient, or will we be remembered as people of faith? People of faith, people who obey God, people who loved God. So we turn to Numbers chapter 26. Now, turn that page over, turn that piece of paper over, And in your right-hand corner, I want you to write the number 26. Number 26. Big, bold letters, number 26. We come to Numbers chapter 26, and Numbers chapter 26 is an interesting thing. At this point, Aaron, draw a point there, an arrow up from the 2. Aaron has died. Wait a minute. You see what I'm talking about? A generation's passing. Here's Moses and Aaron. Moses has not yet died. We'll look at that in just a moment. But here Aaron has died. His son Eleazar is going to take the place of Aaron. And God's already made that covenant with Phinehas. So we're seeing that generation pass away. So Aaron has passed away. So when we come to Numbers chapter 26, I want you to draw the next arrow there up as the census. Or maybe you can just put numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There. The census is going to be taken, and the purpose of the census is to help the people know how much land they're going to receive, how much each tribe is going to receive. And they're going to receive the land based upon the size of the tribes. The Levites in the first numbering were not included. The Levites are included in this numbering of people, but they're not going to get any land. They're going to be provided for by all the other tribes. Now, if you go to the little booklet that Jordan had put together on the wilderness wanderings that I shared with you 2 weeks ago, in the very back of that book, Jordan has a chart. It's excellent with regard to the numbering of the generations. And he lays that out for you. And again, if you don't have a copy of this book, it's available on our website. And I would encourage you to get that and look at that. I'm not going to have time to be able to go through every tribe and how many numbers were in every tribe. But what I would tell you is this, that when those tribes were numbered, from the first counting to this one, there was a loss of 1,820 people. So at this point in time in the numbering, there's 1,820 people fewer than they were in the first numbering. God wasn't happy with the first numbering, but God commanded this numbering because he wants them to know how much land they are to receive and how much it is to be apportioned to each family that is there. The next thing we come to in Numbers chapter 26 is, at this point in time, good news. Moses is still alive. My page got away there. Moses is still alive. So at this point in time, in Numbers chapter 26, Moses is still alive. Aaron has died. God commands a new census of every male 20 years and older. These would have been men of fighting age. They're in the plain of Moab, just across from Jordan, just across from Jericho. You have this slight loss of people, but now then, Moses at this point is still alive. So what do we learn about this numbering here? Write the word application. Write the word application down from that number. So now then, hopefully, if I can get this right, sorry for making it crooked. I'm going to recruit me a holder next time. Aaron has died. You have the census. Moses is still alive, and you have the application that we're going to talk about. So what are some things that we can learn from this? Well, the first thing we can learn as we draw our think cloud, remember we've got to draw our think cloud here. So we're thinking about this numbering that's taking place, and all of a sudden we're just thinking about this out here. Poof, this comes into our mind. What can we think about here? Well, the first thing we think about is God kept his promise to the people. God kept his promise to the people. And as God keeps his promise to the people, God had done what he said he would do. He brought his people through the wilderness. The children of Israel, those sinful generation, he's now brought to the promised land. He caused all the rebels that rebelled against him to die. And so you have these two great truths that are going to come here. And these two great truths are God keeps his promises, and man can't rebel against God without punishment. God's sin is costly. Remember that first one? Numbers chapter 25, sin is costly. The next thing I want you to write is 40 years have passed. Out beside that word that God keeps his promise, I drew that little word there with that book. That's a Bible. You're supposed to know that. You're supposed to have already figured that out. That's a little Bible. That's a book that has the Bible on it. Then write 40 years have passed and write 40 out beside it. Because this numbering begins with a census, and now the generation of spies have all died, as I've said. It's time to number the people. And at first, it may just seem like they're numbers. In fact, Numbers chapter 26 seems like a lot of numbers. But there's a big difference. The difference is in the people they are counting. The previous generation, that generation just passing away, grumbled and complained. This fussing all the way through 40 years to the promised land. They're the ones, that worship the golden calf. They were the ones who asked to go back to Egypt. They're the ones who rebelled time and time again. Korah and his company rebelling against Moses. The story is repeated all over again. They made life hard for Moses. But the generation being counted, that is a new generation. They haven't seen everything their parents' generation saw, but they have something their parents seemed to lose during the wilderness. They have strong faith. They trusted in the words of God. And because of it, now they're ready to march into the land. And God has been with his people. I drew a little heart there with a circle around it. That popped into my mind. God had been with his people. He had seen them through the difficult times, the difficult journey. In fact, we sing a song in our book, "Great is thy faithfulness." That song came into my mind when I was thinking about this. Though one generation has passed away, another generation stands to press forward. God kept his promises, and God has been with his people. God has been good to his people. God delivered on his word, and God is blessing the families now. And through a new generation, they're going to overcome. They're going to be great. God's great and wondrous deeds are going to allow them to conquer the land. I said they're just east of Jericho. Jericho's just over the river. Remember that battle? Remember how they won that battle? Through God, a new generation arose. So I asked in the first thing on chapter 25, I asked the question, how will we be remembered? Now what I want to ask you about this is, how would you describe this generation? How would you describe this generation? How do you think we ought to describe the young believers like yourself? Would we be described as passionate for God? Zealous for his word? Young people who are serious about their faith? I think that describes you. I think that describes you. But now is the time to make the years of your young life a time to honor God and strengthen your faith. Now's the time to do that. Now's the opportunity for you to begin to plant deep those roots that are there, to set deep a solid anchor that will enable you to be steadfast and sure all through your life. Well, let's turn to Numbers chapter 27. And on that second page, now, I ask you to get 2 pieces of paper. On that second page, I want you to write Numbers 27 and 36. Numbers 27 and 36. You see that? I want you to write Numbers 27 and 36, because we're going to talk about those 2 chapters together. Numbers chapter 27 and Numbers chapter 36. Now, when we come to Numbers chapter 27 and chapter 36, these chapters center on how 2 needs were met. In fact, what I'd like for you to do now, right above that number 27, is write the word two needs. Maybe you can just write the number two. Maybe you just write the number two there. So what I'm thinking about here are two needs that are going to be met. First, it's going to answer the question of whether or not a daughter could inherit the father's property if he had no sons. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. The second need it answers, it tells how Moses viewed the promised land. Well, actually, that's a little bit past verse 13 and Numbers chapter 36. But Numbers chapter 36 addresses how Moses viewed the promised land, but died without entering. Oh, while we're not there, and that's not part of our study, isn't that sad? That Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land. Do you remember why? Do you remember why Moses was not allowed to enter the promised land? You remember it was because he smote the rock instead of speaking to the rock? And God said, because of your unbelief, that one time that Moses sinned, because of your unbelief, you'll not be allowed to lead the children of Israel to the promised land. Do you remember who did? It was Joshua, wasn't it? But we're a little far advanced from where we need to be. So now we come back to that first of two needs. That first of two needs, and what I want you to write here on the next little piece there are daughters. And maybe you can just draw a little girl. Maybe you can just draw a picture of a little girl there. I think there are a lot of little girls out there that are watching this that sent me some great pictures last week or 2 weeks ago. Maybe you just draw a picture of a little girl there. How would you draw that? Well, what happened is this fellow by the name of Zelophehad, I worked on that real hard to try to get that down and just blew it. Zelophehad, well, I'll quit. Okay. He had some daughters, but he was part of the generation that sinned and had no sons. Well, the point was that the sons would inherit the land, but he had no sons. All he has is daughters. And so the daughters say, hey, wait just a minute here. Whoa, time out here. Can we ask a question here? We're his daughters. He has no sons. Yeah, he sinned. But can we have his land? Now, there was not there was not anything in the provision that was there for the daughters to have the land. And so they come and they treat Moses with respect, and they appeal to Moses. And God says, okay, you can have the land. You can have the land. These daughters were defenseless, and it shows God's concern for the defenseless. And he ensured the needs of these women. And God further instructed Moses to explain some add-ons, some amendments to the law. For example, if a man had a son or sons, his land was to go to him. According to the law, the wife did not inherit the husband's property when he died. God made provisions for the care of widows. If he had no sons, his inheritance was to go to his daughter. You see that in chapter 27. If he had no daughter, the land was to go to his brothers. If he had no brothers, his land was to go to his father's brothers, his uncles. If he had no brothers, the inheritance was given to the nearest relative in the family. So the girls are going to receive the land. But in Numbers chapter 26, they come and they say, wait a minute. What happens if these girls marry outside the tribe? Now, that tribe they married into is going to get their land. And we're going to lose our land. And that's not right. You gave this land to us. And now then, if these girls marry somebody outside the tribe, they're going to have this land. That man they marry is going to inherit this land too. And they're going to have more than their share. So God says, okay, you can marry, but you can only marry inside the tribe, so that the land of the family stayed where it was. It was intended, where it stayed, where it was intended to stay. It was never intended to go outside the time of the tribe. Well, that brings me to something else to think about. And I want to think for just a moment, right now, down at the bottom, Israel. I tried to think in my mind how to illustrate, how to draw Israel. I'm not really sure how to draw Israel. So maybe you can think of something like that and you can send me your picture. When I think of Israel, this kind of sums up Israel here. Israel was to be a worshiping people. They would offer sacrifices sometimes daily, weekly, monthly, at an annual feast. And in addition, individuals brought sacrifices when seeking forgiveness as well, forgiveness of their sins. God chose Israel to be a nation completely, wholly devoted to Him. And God's place was at the heart of the community. And you remember that was part of what the tabernacle was about, and that was part of what the temple is about. The tabernacle was the dwelling place of God, and the temple became the dwelling place of God. And God's word governed His people. And under God's word, Israel were to be a people who loved His word and loved God. But they were to be a nation completely devoted to God. God is at the heart of these people. You see that in His tabernacle, you see that in the temple, and you see this in all the laws that God had given them. And so they were to go into the land, and they were to, and here we go, they were to conquer the land. Now they're going to go into the land, and they're going to conquer the land. I thought about maybe drawing a soldier there, maybe with a shield and a sword. And they're going to go and they're going to conquer the land. They're going to drive out all the people in the land. And they're going to have a single mind. They're going to think about one thing, their devotion to God. That's what they're going to be thinking about and concentrating on. Well, that brings me to something. Draw a think cloud here on the other side of the page now. We got to draw a think cloud. So I'm thinking about this, and poof, here's that little thought that goes out here. And I'm thinking about, okay, what can we learn from this? Well, what we learn is we learn some examples of great faith. These daughters that came to Moses and asking for the land, these were women who had great faith in God. And these daughters were respectful. And they were respectful of God, and they were respectful of Moses when they came and asked for the land. They didn't come and say, "You give that to us." They didn't come whining and crying. They came and they asked for. They were brave because the land wasn't given to the girls; it was given to the boys. They were brave, and they loved and they honored God. They didn't want to do anything to dishonor God, but they wanted also to have their share of the land, just like everybody else was having. And these girls made a difference. And so at the bottom, I have today, I have a little question mark in you. What difference can you make today? What difference can you make today? And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about examples of great faith. And I thought about a number of women that were examples of great faith in our church. Can you think about some of the women in our church that have great faith, that demonstrate great faith? Can you think about some of the women that we have that are very respectful, they brave, they love, and they honor God? Maybe you can think of somebody in your class that's that way. Maybe you can think of somebody in your class that's that way. That they are going to be people who are going to make a difference today. And that's what we want to be remembered for. Now, I'm going to transition here as I close, and I'm going to go to Jordan's book. And Jordan's book, he has some thought questions off each of these chapters, and I'm going to pull one or two of these thought questions out to end with. Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. Jordan asked the question, what happens when we don't take a serious approach to sin? What are some examples we might have of defeating sin? Phineas was one. Remember that? Numbers chapter 25, verse 10 through 18. Phineas' jealousy for the Lord resulted in standing up against sin. How is standing up against sin a way we can defend God's honor? And does it matter how we stand against sin? God's jealous. What does God want? He wants our complete devotion. He wants our faithful commitment to him. He wants us only to worship him. He's adamant. He strongly hates idolatry and worshiping false gods. The Israelites were his people, and he wasn't going to share them with anybody. He wasn't going to share them with Baal Peor or any false god. God was jealous for them. Don't touch my people. And Phinehas' jealousy resulted in standing up against sin. Will we be as jealous for God as God is for us? And then from Numbers chapter 26, verses 1 through 11, we take the census. God's commanding that to be done. But in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, Paul tells Timothy not to let anybody look down on their youthful lusts or youthfulness. Why couldn't the older generation in the wilderness look on the younger generation? And how can we keep the older generation from looking down the younger generation? We can do that when we as a younger generation demonstrate respect for God and respect for them. And by the way, if you're of the older generation, we need to respect and love and appreciate this younger generation. That's important for us. Then we come to Numbers chapter 26 again, in verses 12 through 56, the last part. Let me ask you a question. Have you seen God's faithfulness in your life? Jordan says, because God is faithful, you finish the sentence. Because God is faithful, you finish that sentence. Because God is faithful, he has blessed me to be with this church and with these people. Because God is faithful, he's given me a wonderful wife, wonderful children, and wonderful grandchildren. Because God is faithful, he's given me Jordan, Holly, and Benjamin, Noah, and Emma. Then we come to Numbers chapter 27 and chapter 36. I've already asked you, I'll repeat it. Name some women from this church that have incredible faith. In fact, let me put something right beside that. Name some women from the Bible that have incredible faith. Name some women from the Bible that have incredible faith. I hope you liked that lesson. I learned a lot from this lesson. I learned about how God had kept his promise, how God had kept his word, how God loved his people, and how God loves us today. And I want as I close with you, I want you to feel like God is reaching down and he's wrapping his arms around every one of us and he's pulling us tight and close and saying, you're my people. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to take care of you because I love you. And God is faithful. God is faithful to his promise. Well, Jody and I love you, and we miss you. She told me to tell you hi, and I sure appreciate her helping me with the graphics tonight so you could read better. I look forward to seeing you. I look forward to hearing from you. And stay faithful to God. I hope you have a great night and a good tomorrow. Thank you for joining me.